picking up immediately where the previous video installation had left off at, as the major flank clearance operation that was occurring in the small rural hamlet known as Medkif was underway in order to prevent any possible interference whatsoever at all from the 750-strong militia force located on its headquarters property in Medkif from conducting any conceivable interference whatsoever at all with the advance of the external invasion prong of PLA Group Armies 1 through 6 along with the 41st Russian Combined Arms Army as they raced inland from the border with Mexico in order to reach the small city known as Big Spring, wherein sat their major logistical resupply dump, which would enable them to advance even further inland until they reached their next one by the time they would arrive in the city of Lubbock. As the other flank clearance operation occurring at 12:30 a.m. on the ground was happening on the west side of the map in the city of Odessa, as the militia force located on its southernmost outer fringes in a suburban area of Odessa, technically even still within city limits, housed a militia force in a neighborhood located in the south of the city of some 580 personnel strong. While smaller than the militia force in Medkif, this particular militia could potentially be a thorn in the side of the capture and clearance of major objectives merely 5 miles to the southwest, as the 1st Brigade of the People's Armed Police 2nd Light Armored Division, as their responsibilities were over the western half of this primary battle space, would see one of their armored battalions striking from the northwest, moving towards the southeast and east as they swung in on local rural roads to attack and clear the ICE detention center, as well as destroying the 150th Brigade Engineering Battalion as an effective fighting force, effectively nullifying this unit on their forward operating base, as this particular combat battalion was part of the larger 155th Armored Brigade combat team who had deployed other elements of its brigade within this particular battle space, including the 1st of the 635th Armored Battalion with its Alpha Company deployed in the north of Odessa at the local municipal airport near the National Guard Armory, which at the time also housed the 106th Brigade Support Battalion, which was the chief logistical force within the 155th Armored Brigade combat team. There was also a U.S. Army Reserve Company, the 877th Quartermaster Company, located at the Permian Basin Army Reserve Readiness Center, which was an Army Reserve installation located immediately outside of the airport grounds of the Midland International Air and Spaceport, which itself was another major objective that the 2nd People's Armed Police Light Armored Division had to capture at the opening of the invasion. As the 580-strong militia force located on the southern fringes of Odessa could possibly, even if inadvertently, serve as a major threat to the flanks of the assault against the ICE Detention Center and 150th Brigade Engineering Battalion's forward operating base, which is located immediately adjacent to the detention center, effectively connected to it to the north, as even 2 sapper companies provided by the 350th Battalion of the National Construction and Production Corps' 7th Division, which hailed out of Xinjiang, were also partaking in the assault against the ICE Detention Center, as the 2 committed companies would attack from the east, moving westward, effectively with the PAP Armored Battalion from its 1st Brigade of the 2nd Light Armored Division pincering this facility on 2 sides. As another armored battalion from the 1st Brigade of the 2nd Light Armored Division would be tasked with the clearance of the flanks to support the operation to capture this major objective and clear it of regime security forces, both the ICE paramilitary and the U.S. Army forces of the 150th Brigade Engineering Battalion on site, as this armored battalion would strike from the northeast, moving towards the southwest on local rural routes. As many neighborhoods in the opening of the invasion would go from relatively serene, quiet neighborhoods to gory, bloody battlefields, the south of the city of Odessa would be no exception, as this particular neighborhood, which housed this militia force, was a quiet mixed development area consisting of many standard civilian homes mixed with many trailer homes, also mixed in with metal buildings, as well as also standard buildings made of course, cinder blocks, concrete, and other building materials, which included hotels, motels, and a few dollar stores and other types of shops in the area. As there were many motorists on the road at the opening of the invasion, many had fled ahead of the advance of this armored battalion, hurriedly warning the local residents in this area of what they had seen, as it was well known, even if effectively low-key, that there were 7 major militias located throughout the Midland and Odessa battle space, and many of the locals throughout this entire region were well aware of them by this point. Again, these militias had essentially come together as a direct result of the mounting civil unrest and also the chaos and pandemonium caused by the massive earlier influx of the armed migrant criminal elements which had permeated and effectively invaded the nation, although the Trojan shock armies, which had also built up, were the more quiet of the two elements, as they sat quietly upon their strategically purchased CCP regime properties, awaiting the day when the signal would be given for their hard invasion, as the soft invasion phase was effectively their buildup, unbeknownst to many of the American citizenry. As it pertained to the deployment of coalition forces, preliminary actionable intelligence gathered by the PLA's cyber warfare arm, as well as the cyber warfare and AI elements of their other allies, particularly Russia, that had aided effectively in the deployment of coalition forces, including the 2nd PAP Light Armored Division, as the People's Armed Police had certain skill sets, as they were considered a crack elite counterinsurgency force due to their many decades of experience of crushing rebels in Xinjiang, as they had ample success and were brutally fanatical fighters and had effectively become the Praetorian Guard of the CCP regime, similar to what the Waffen-SS was in World War II fame for the German regime. The 2nd People's Armed Police Light Armored Division was ostensibly the perfect fit for this battle space, and thus, according to the actionable intelligence about heavily armed American civilian militias, had been thus deployed to this particular battle space in order to not only destroy the American regime security forces of its military and paramilitary alphabet elements, but also to brutally put down and crush the armed reactionary civilians and, of course, the armed civilian militias, as the AI and cyber warfare arm both collected and cataloged the acquired intelligence, many of it coming from the U.S. regime itself, which kept tabs on such groups. It was well understood that these were well-organized, well-trained, and even well-funded militia groups, and even well-led to a certain extent, as there were ample numbers of personnel with experience from the previous American conflicts. And also, it was understood, although not the extent of which, that these militias had acquired heavy weaponry on the black market, as many of the heavy weapons accrued by these militias were gained through Eastern European arms dealers, which siphoned the weapons off of stocks provided by the United States and its Western European allies through the Great Eastern European Proxy Conflict. these weapons had effectively been sold to Mexican cartels, who in turn turned around and sold the weapons back into American hands via straw buyers sent by these different militia groups, as these militias had wealthy backers and also pooled their funds together to purchase these heavy weapons to essentially improve their position as militia forces with heavy weapons. As the militias were essentially enemies of the cartels for all intents and purposes, they put aside some of their differences as the ends justified the means in terms of acquiring these heavy weapons, and effectively conducted business dealings in order to attain these weapons, which included everything from machine guns of different calibers, including M250 cal heavy machine guns, to light anti-armor weapons, and even anti-tank guided missiles. Of course, there were also even heavier weapons, yet still in some categories, as well as also even SHORAD capabilities, as there was one of the 7 militias that boasted acquired Stinger missile systems, as the militia located in the farthest southwest corner of this battle space had such capabilities. These would come as a surprise to the People's Armed Police in the opening battle, whereupon this particular militia group had actually kept tabs on local foreign operations occurring on the CCP regime property, which had, upon discovery, been found as very odd. But also contingency plans were made in the event of a national emergency to assault this facility and figure out what was going on there exactly. And at the opening of the invasion, this militia force would do just that, sending in a strike force to attack the headquarters and support battalion over the entire 1st Brigade of the 2nd People's Armed Police Light Armor Division, who again, the 1st Brigade was responsible for the entire Odessa half of the Midland and Odessa battle space, with the 2nd Brigade responsible for the Midland side. As the invasion opened up, and again, motorists had moved through this area quickly, warning the local inhabitants of what they had seen, particularly militia members who lived and worked in this very neighborhood. As we go to the map of this local area, this particular neighborhood, a 1.5 mile east-west by 1 mile north-south area, was filled again with residential and business locations, as again it was a mixture of standard suburban housing as well as trailer homes, as well as metal portable buildings and businesses, and again buildings comprised of standard building materials. As this mixed development housed many of the local militia members themselves, their arms, including heavy weapons, were always within arm's reach in case of an emergency. However, unlike the militia force that was conducting training in the Medkif area at the time of the invasion, the militia force located in the farthest southern fringes of Odessa was taken completely by surprise at the opening of the invasion, as by midnight the tandem anti-satellite and cyber strikes had effectively nullified all American communications and ISR capabilities, with the electronic warfare assets of the PLAAFs orbiting Y9LG EW/Elin aircraft, effectively jamming all redundant radio communication capabilities in the area, as well as also any type of radar ISR capabilities, hence making the Americans thrust back into Stone Age conditions. As the invasion opened up, the combat companies within the particular armored battalion from the 1st Brigade of the 2nd People's Armed Police Light Armor Division assaulting this area would break up into a sort of hammer and anvil type of force, as they would cordon and sweep this particular area, as the 4 light tank companies and 3 armored infantry companies would all be partaking in this assault. The 3 of 4 light tank companies would surround the area from the north, from the west, and from the south, as the cordon force, with 2 armored infantry companies effectively interspersing among them to provide mutual armor and infantry support with one another, while the remaining one light tank company and one armored infantry company would be the hammer force to the anvil force and sweep this particular area, preventing these militiamen from being able to break out of their neighborhood and possibly come to the aid of American regime security forces 5 miles to the southwest and just across State Highway 385, as they would be under their own heavy assault, as the ICE detention center was highly coveted real estate, as it could be rapidly converted into a laogai for the post-invasion colonization operations, as any captured prisoners of war, as well as the conscripted local population, which would be conscripted into labor brigades, could be housed in this facility, as it was a ready-made facility and would need very little in the way of any repairs or additions after its capture, as it was wanted as much intact as humanly possible. It was to be taken in a highly surgical manner by the combination of the National Construction and Production Corps sapper companies, of which 2 had been committed from the 350th Battalion of the 7th Division, alongside of which would also be the People's Armed Police Armored Battalion assaulting the facility from the northwest and west as they moved into the area to effectively assault the 150th Brigade Engineering Battalion's forward operating base alongside of the ICE detention center immediately to the south of it, as the 150th Brigade Engineering Battalion would put up the best fight that they possibly could given the circumstances they were facing. They would be brutally annihilated by this combined assault, as this particular assault was to occur at the exact same time as the flank clearance operation in the neighborhood in the southern fringes of Odessa would be occurring in tandem with this. Again, as the facility was highly coveted and was to be taken as surgically as possible by these coalition forces, it would be rapidly converted into a brutal laogai even before the 4-day invasion had officially come to an end, showcasing the rapidity of the overall war planning and aftermath for the nation by the coalition forces. As the clock essentially struck 12:30 a.m., People's Armed Police companies from the Armored Battalion assaulting the neighborhood had now broken up into their individual company elements, with the 3 light tank companies cordoning the northwest and south, moving into the area with the 2 armored infantry companies interspersing between them, while the remaining light tank company and armored infantry company moved in to sweep the area in their hammer and anvil assault, with the headquarters and support company, which was the command and logistical elements, remaining on their CCP regime property to truck supplies forward to the combat units, as each combat company had a headquarters platoon, which was the company-level command and logistical elements, which would receive the supplies from the headquarters and support company over the whole battalion. As we go to the map of the area again, as the air power of the coalition, which was allocated to this campaign, essentially being the Su-24 strike aircraft squadron of the Iranian Air Force, as well as also the F-14 fighter squadron of the Iranian Air Force, and a J-35A fighter squadron of the PLAAF, and the JH-7 strike aircraft squadron of the PLAAF. The air power at this time would be handling troublesome areas in terms of the strike aircraft, while the F-14s would essentially be tasked with the downing of rotary aircraft taking flight in this battle space, mostly belonging to American paramilitary elements of the American alphabet forces, while the J-35A fighter squadron, with its highly advanced beyond visual range missile capabilities, as well as it being a fifth-generation advanced fighter aircraft in general terms, was responsible for patrolling the airspace and effectively ensuring that threats beyond the airspace could be easily neutralized using their beyond visual range capabilities, as it was their top priority to ensure that the orbiting KJ 2000 AWACS aircraft, commanding many of the air operations in this sector of the South Central Invasion sector as a whole, along with the orbiting Y9LG electronic warfare / ELIN aircraft, were properly protected as they conducted their missions in this particular portion of the South Central Invasion sector. As we go back to the map of the area, a pair of J-35A fighters would make a pass over the battle space while the battle on the ground was ongoing, as the attacking battalion in question would not receive any artillery support whatsoever at all, nor would they even receive air support, as the air power would be earmarked for more troublesome areas, and nor would it be needed in this instance, as the armored battalion, utilizing its own capabilities, including in the form of its combat drone section, launching their TEL-based system of 48 tubes of CH-91A loitering munitions, these being equipped with fragmentation warheads, would be more than enough to suppress and destroy the American ground forces. The only outside support that would be received by this battalion would be in the form of two Wing Loon 2 dedicated combat drones, or UCAVs, which would fire ATGMs at ground targets in support of this operation, as this would be, in effect, precision air support from these dedicated combat drones, as the support that could be received from air power was far more powerful. These ATGMs offered the ability to strike targets without doing any severe damage to critical infrastructure, including local highways that were seen as somewhat important. As the battle kicked off, the two attacking companies arrayed themselves for combat, as each company, the Armored Infantry Company in the north and the Light Tank Company in the south, would leave their headquarters platoons off-map, as each company's headquarters platoon would get in a defensive star formation and would receive supplies from the headquarters and support company over the entire battalion, who was trucking the supplies down to the headquarters platoons, who in turn would turn around and bring the supplies forward to the fighting combat elements. As the Armored Infantry Company in the north would break into its three combat platoons, again leaving its headquarters platoon behind and off map, one platoon in the far north would attack in a wedge formation of their vehicles, with their infantry fighting vehicle as the point vehicle, which was their Type 86G, or Guy, or improved in Chinese vehicle, with its powerful 30mm autocannon, its rail-mounted on the turret HJ-73C short-range ATGM, and of course their turret-based coaxial machine gun, their 7.62 by 54mm machine gun, to handle infantry forces at closer ranges. As the 30mm autocannon was a very powerful weapon indeed, it could fire several types of shells, including HE armor-piercing ammunition, standard armor-piercing ammunition, or just plain HE shells. As these devastating weapons of war were being unleashed on this battlefield, they would cause immense destruction in this particular neighborhood, especially to this local militia force, who was violently awakened from their sleep by the thunderous cacophony of artillery, air power, drone power, and even missile strikes from the PLA strategic missile forces hitting targets throughout this battle space in all directions around them, sometimes even mere miles from this location, such as in the case to the southwest, where the Ice Detention Center and forward operating base of the 150th Brigade Engineering Battalion were coming under brutal coalition assault. As these forces of this armored battalion moved in, as the two attacking companies entered the area, they would go block by block, clearing out all of the buildings or brutally shelling them with 105 millimeter tank shells, typically of the HE or the HEAT, which was high explosive anti-tank, Frag T, which are fragmentation shells, or in some cases even canister shells, which had a sort of shotgun effect. They, of course, also had the ability to fire ATGMs, but these were typically reserved for long distance assaults against enemy armor. And also, they had their DU tungsten based, or they had their DU Sabo ammunition and their tungsten based Sabo ammunition, but again, these were reserved for armored vehicles, as these were ideal for destroying enemy tanks and other armor. These would not be necessary in this particular case, as they were not facing any armored forces. They were simply facing a militia, which their weaponry they came equipped with was more than enough to do the job, as the saying could be said. As these forces entered the area, they already had begun to brutally open fire on local buildings, causing immense damage as they entered the area. 2 columns, 1 platoon each, of armored infantry moved in along some of the major roads in the area, which consisted of Bull Run Drive, Adobe Drive, as well as J.P. Teal Drive, Betty Lou Drive, and immediately south and just off the map was Harrisburg Drive, which abutted the south of their headquarters location. As the headquarters location had been purchased by this militia, it originally had been, in the past, a service center for 18-wheelers or long-haul trucks, and now served as the headquarters of this militia. It at first had a sort of clubhouse atmosphere, but gradually over time morphed into a sort of quasi-military command center with a logistical building for their stocks of heavier weapons and ammunition and food in the form of MREs and non-perishable foods and water, as well as fuel. And also they had their command building, which was their headquarters building, and the large service building formerly used for the 18-wheelers now was used to service the militia's technicals, as the members contributed their own pickup trucks and SUVs to this purpose. They effectively had them lined up in a sort of ad hoc motor pool outside of the facility. There were also 2 churches in the area, and a cowboy church here, and another church here, and a self-storage location in this area as well. And of course, there was a tire shop and also an RV store on the western side of the state highway of 385, as well as a hotel and 2 dollar stores, gas station, and a marble shop, and also a concrete and landscaping business in the area, among other suburban homes and trailer homes and other small businesses of note. As the light tank company moved in just to the south, they would receive mutual support from the dismounted infantry troops of the southernmost platoon of armored infantry, who would advance along with them as they cleared buildings in these city blocks. The armored infantry would help in the actual clearance of these buildings, as they would rapidly breach and move through the buildings in savage building assaults, and they would clear these buildings in their squads, broken down into 5-man stack teams or half squads, as they would proceed methodically but rapidly through these buildings as they would clear them. In this particular block in the center, as the northernmost platoon of the 4 combat platoons of light tanks moved into this area, they would guard the flanks of the main assault of their 2 light tank platoons in a staggered column formation of light tanks along Betty Lou Drive, while just to the south of them on their southern flank, another platoon would guard the southern flank as they would move and get into a single column formation to cut off southern escape routes from the main headquarters area of this militia. As this militia, not quite as well armed as the militia in Medkif, still had a relatively sizable number of anti-armor weapons in the form of the Airtronic PSRL-1 rocket-propelled grenades, as well as also AT-4s and LAWs, and even had some anti-tank guided missiles, such as a few Milan anti-tank guided missiles, which were a European ATGM, as well as also NLAW anti-tank systems. And while they did not have any anti-tank mines or even improvised devices that they produced themselves, they still had a small number of Claymore mines, which they would frantically try to deploy in this particular operation. As ATVs were seen as ideal vehicles for quick hit-and-run attacks with RPG teams or spreading messages or even scouting operations, this militia, with some of its members utilizing ATVs, would conduct missions in terms of trying to utilize RPG teams, as well as also spreading messages using these platforms. 10 minutes into the invasion, loitering munitions would enter the fray in the form of the widely mass-produced CH-901As. With their fragmentation warheads, they were fully capable of hitting and knocking out soft-skinned vehicles, whether civilian or military, as well as also annihilating groupings of dismounted infantry-type forces. In the north, the wedge formation of vehicles would cover northern escape routes with fields of fire that extended nearly all of the way across this battle space, as both their 12.7 millimeter W85 heavy machine guns mounted aboard the Type 63 armor personnel carriers, as well as also the powerful 30 millimeter autocannon aboard the Type 86G, had plenty of range and could reach out and effectively touch targets nearly a mile away with ease, and also even beyond if need be, as these vehicles would not yet deploy their infantry mounted up aboard. They would advance at first slowly, but then leave the map across a deserty field before ultimately re-entering, crossing under the highway along Adobe, and getting onto W Avenue here before they would get into a herringbone formation of their vehicles and dismount their 5 infantry squads. As the PAP would suffer moderate but acceptable casualties in the operation occurring in Medkif, effectively to the general south of Midland, in the operation occurring to clear the flanks in the south of Odessa, this militia would be almost completely taken by total surprise, and therefore would suffer immensely while dealing out relatively lower casualties to the attacking People's Armed Police force. As this particular block was in the process of being cleared out, the light tanks would smash through flimsy metal fencing and would destroy structures located in the area. Although these suburban homes were relatively well built with stone and brick masonry, although some were still built of wood, these more hardened suburban homes would serve as ideal strong points for the local militia forces to fire their anti-armor or even anti-tank weaponry out of the windows thereof, although the fighting in these areas would be hellacious and massively destructive. The militiamen, despite being taken completely aback and off guard, would put up the best fight they could conceivably put up, even as they would be taking fire from the Type 62G light tanks with their very potent 105mm rifled tank guns, as well as also Type 69 rocket-propelled grenade fire, anti-tank guided missile fire, and also other weapons deployed against them. As this particular light tank in this animation or illustration would fire a canister shell at this technical. It would blow this technical into shredded, twisted metal while ripping into this trailer home right behind it, throwing pieces of its siding and building materials in different directions, while also ripping personnel into literal shreds of human meat. As the armored infantry squads moved in to provide mutual infantry and armor support with the light tanks, the buildings on this particular block would be in the process of being cleared at the opening of this map. As again, 10 minutes in, or by 12:40 a.m., the loitering munitions would show up into the area, and on their AI target-seeking mode, they would look for high-value targets to strike, which included personnel taking positions on high ground, or in this case, on the roofs of buildings, such as snipers/sharpshooters on the gas station roof, and others on the roof of this particular dollar store, as well as also technicals caught out in the open in the areas behind buildings on the different suburban blocks. As these technicals were just deploying their troops out of the back of the technicals, the loitering munitions were already coming in hot and fast and would begin to slam into the technicals, and groupings of troops caught in the open trying to congregate and come up with ad hoc tactical planning. Again, as they had lost all of their communications capabilities, they had to effectively bunch up in groups in order to communicate, as earshot, line of sight, and vehicle-based communications were now the only form of communication. This put them at high risk of being struck by loitering munition strikes or even ground-based fire. Even also UCAV, or the dedicated combat drone fire from the Wing-Loom 2s, which opened fire on militia technicals trying to flee north on State Highway 385 to get into Odessa to look for anyone and everyone who could help them and effectively come to their aid. However, they would not make it, as they too would be struck and destroyed, even by the HJ-10 ATGMs fired by this single Wing-Loom 2. On the other side of the highway, where there were fewer militiamen, the militiamen that were here, caught in the open, would likewise be struck by ATGM fire from the Wing-Loom 2, opening fire with 4 ATGMs. This grouping of personnel tried to flee under the highway, but would be struck by loitering munition strikes, while this technical would be destroyed by an HJ-10 strike. This technical, just deploying its personnel out of the back, would also be hit by an ATGM strike, and these personnel on the roof were being hit by an ATGM strike, an HJ-10. Personnel that made it out of the back of this technical, effectively a squad of 10 men, made it into this business while their technical had been hit and destroyed by a CH-901A loitering munition. As this platoon had dismounted all of its squads, as well as this platoon had here on Adobe, one squad was moving in through the garage to clear this house, as they had already cleared this suburban home, with this squad in a double-column rolling shield formation on the right side of their armored personnel carrier, their Type 63. As the IFVs led these two columns, the Type 86Gs, they were in position to lay down devastating fire down the street, while their squads dismounted on either side would clear the buildings just ahead of their advance in order to clear out RPG or anti-tank guided missile teams operating from hidden positions inside of the homes in order to protect their vehicles that they had dismounted from. As this squad had moved through the area, their flamethrower operator with their Type 73 flamethrower would barbecue this shed in the backyard of this home, as there were 2 personnel having had been spotted by both the high altitude drones of the ISR apparatus as well as the quadcopter assets running into this building. Fire was therefore vectored into the shed, including with the flamethrower, and the 2 personnel were simply roasted alive, as well as being peppered with rounds from this dismounted squad, and even some vehicle-based fire from heavy machine gun fire, completely destroying the shed, As this squad moved in to clear this home, the squad moved up alongside of them as they were clearing it, while these two squads bounded and covered tactically towards this house to begin to clear it, ahead of the advance of their vehicles, which would move up slowly as they cleared homes and buildings and areas ahead of the advance. While that was happening, this platoon in the far north would advance to this position here, and this platoon would advance down Bull Run, preparing to turn onto J.P. Teal. While that was going on, this squad cleared this trailer, this squad cleared this trailer, while this squad moved up alongside of it as it was being cleared, as did this squad here. While that was happening, these light tanks moved into position, moving up, smashing through these flimsy metal fences in the area, whether they were paneled fences or chain link fences. The light tanks simply ran through them completely, smashing gates as well as they moved in. By now, as these buildings had been cleared, the squads would move alongside of the light tanks and move behind them for cover. As the squad would move into position along this light tank, both would lay down fire into this well-built, strong, large suburban home, destroying the shed in the backyard in the process. Everything from rocket-propelled grenade fire to even HJ-08 ATGM fire was utilized against the shed, and then ultimately against the house, along with tank shell fire in the form of frag T shells hitting the stone walls on the side of the home in the back. There were 30 personnel holed up in this home. While this squad cleared this building would come out and would lay down supporting fire, this squad that had advanced alongside this light tank would advance around it to breach and clear the home of remaining survivors who were still inside, as fire had been laid down against the light tanks that had moved into position outside, with this light tank even smashing through this trailer home, completely destroying it, and smashing through the flimsy paneled fencing on the other side, and helping to lay down fire into the building, as did this light tank and this light tank here. They would hold their fire once the armored infantry squads would continue their advance, with this squad having had assisted the light tank laying down fire until this building was breached, pivoting and advancing behind this light tank and this light tank to clear this building, while this squad moved up and this squad moved up along the side of this building as this squad was moving through and clearing it. Effectively, this was the marble shop, and there was no distinction made between unarmed civilians and the civilian militia that were inside. As this home doubled as a residence and a business, it had a small lobby area inside as it was a large home, and the 5-man stack team rushed into this area, as it was a half squad, with 2 members watching the entry and exit point, while one ran to push his back up against the wall quickly, and the other that ran into this position came around the corner and effectively disemboweled this militiaman with the pistol here, going right through his body armor with the bayonet around the corner. As this was all very rapid movement, as this member, this soldier, ran to press his back against the wall, another ran and took cover behind this wooden desk, firing over it at another militiaman here with his AR, and a grenade had been thrown by a member from the other stack team into this area. It was all very fast, very rapid movement, highly aggressive, as the People's Armed Police were extremely aggressive in their fighting style, even more so than were their PLA brethren, who took a far more cautious approach. Although the PAP were not completely reckless, they were extremely gung-ho in terms of their aggression level and their tempo of operations. By now, as this building had been cleared of its survivors inside, as it had taken some tank shell and heavy machine gun fire from the light tanks, this squad would now bound to clear this building, this other home, while this squad and this squad would move up alongside of this building as it was being cleared inside, according to standard building clearance procedures, by which time these light tanks and their staggered vehicle column had moved slightly up Betty Lou Drive, as they were the main spearheading force of the light tank company, with the other 2 platoons, one to the north and one to the south, guarding their flanks of their main assault down Betty Lou Drive. As they had already opened fire on this building here with another 30 personnel inside, they were taking return fire with mostly hand grenades, small arms, and machine gun fire, but an RPG had been used on the lead tank on the left side of this column facing south, and had taken some minor damage as it was hit in the side where there was some explosive reactive armor that effectively nullified much of the damage done to the tank itself, while the tank returned fire with its very powerful 105mm rifled tank gun into the building. These squads, now along the tanks taking cover, laying down fire, now rush to clear this building, with the flamethrower operator firing jets of incendiary firepower from their flamethrower into the building itself before the rest of the squad would bound in to clear it. In this animation or illustration, the People's Armed Police squads assaulting these suburban homes, which are next door to one another on the street here, pressed up against this brick wall for cover before laying down heavy fire. This soldier here firing his 35mm grenade tube into the top floor, while the flamethrower operator with his Type 74 is firing jets of molten incendiary firepower into the window of this home, while this soldier is laying down covering fire into this home on the other side in the back of these homes facing another street, while this stack team is preparing to raid this house as another group of troops throws hand grenades into the upper floors, as well as laying suppressing fire, while this stack team bounds and breaches to clear this home. Such was going on in this battle as well, as this squad breached this home. This squad and this squad would move alongside of the building as was being cleared. At the opening of the assault, these members here had fled 10 troops or militiamen into the relative safety, at least for the time being, of their compound, where they would turn and take position along the double fencing of the building, which had metal panel fencing as well as also chain link fencing with concertina wiring on the top of the fence to keep out outsiders. However, it would not hold forever, as this platoon of light tanks had moved onto Harrisburg Drive just immediately off map in a single column formation to cut off southern escape routes from this facility, firing tank shells into this massive garage building at the 100 personnel inside, who would gradually be whittled down by the heavy fire. At the opening of the assault, these two ATVs were spreading the message that the PAP light tanks were en route on Harrisburg Drive, as they had just turned onto this particular entry point to the church and to their facility from Harrisburg Drive, as these light tanks were now moving along the street, just barely missing the fire being vectored at them as they turned onto this road to enter the gate area to their compound to spread the word. By the time they had done so, the light tanks were already cutting off the southern escape routes and firing into the facility, as this building was being cleared of its last survivors, as it originally had 30 personnel inside. These squads moved up on each side. This squad that had cleared this building had crossed and moved between the tanks to get to clear this building, as at the opening, this light tank had exchanged fire with personnel who ran out of the building trying to fire an RPG at the light tank, but were cut down by the turret machine gunner as they left the building. As the tanks had moved earlier and this clearance operation was going on, this squad would move to this fence, press up against it, and then move through the opening between these two fences here to clear this building with this squad here, as they would also move through the gate to clear this building, while this squad and this squad, the squad that had cleared the building and this squad that had moved alongside of it, would pivot and move along this fence line here along Bull Run, where they then would wait for these two squads to press ahead to clear this building and establish positions in and even on the roof of this building to lay suppressing fire into the facility to enable these squads to safely move to clear these other buildings. As the tanks would begin to move slowly down Betty Lou, these buildings had to be cleared ahead of their advance and to ensure there were no RPG teams within. As all of that was going on, at the same time in the north, as these homes were in the process of being cleared, Two other homes were effectively strong points for the militia forces. There were 10 personnel in each home, or effectively each home possessing the equivalent of a squad within it. And these homes would have to be neutralized by the dismounted infantry, as the armored infantry troops were moving just ahead of the advance of their vehicles to ensure that there were no RPG teams or AT-4 teams or even LAW teams that could lay fire against their vehicles. As this squad bounded to this area and laid down suppressing fire, as this squad had laid suppressing fire for this squad to get here, they then laid suppressing fire, allowing the squad to breach the home through the garage to begin the clearance thereof. As two militia members from this home had earlier gotten out of the home on the side window, untarped and unnetted, as they had camo netting over this ATV, and got into it. As they laid an AT-4 from behind their ATV, they prepared to cross the street but were destroyed by fire from the 30mm autocannon of the lead infantry fighting vehicle. As this operation was happening here to begin to clear the house, they were destroyed by fire from the vehicle down the street. As this home was also in the process of being cleared simultaneously, as this squad advanced along the home as it was being cleared, this squad then exited through the front door and then prepared to lay down fire at this home, while this squad then bounded ahead of them and laid down fire for this squad to then breach. As they took some fire upon entry, there would be heavy fighting in each of these homes as the stack teams moved through the buildings. They would clear every hallway and every room in these homes, regardless of who was inside, whether it was militia members or whether it was unarmed civilian personnel, as the People's Armed Police, unlike their PLA brethren, had no concern whatsoever at all for civilian casualties. If the PLA killed civilians, it was collateral damage, but the PAP simply reveled in it. They enjoyed it. Everybody was a target for them. And they, again, would clear this entire neighborhood, not only of the combatants, but even the unarmed combatants, as they seen them as an equal threat for simply living in an area known as a hotbed of militia activity. As many of the non-combatants were even armed anyhow, they were rapidly dispatched by the People's Armed Police as they entered the buildings and homes in this area. As the light tanks, having had helped in the clearance of this block, now came together in a single line formation, they would move through this area behind this fence and between this building, but the squad in a double column rolling shield would peel off and clear this building, as personnel had just been seen coming onto the roof but were quickly destroyed by a loitering munition before they could heave Molotov cocktails off the roof at the light tanks. As that had occurred, and these tanks are in a single line column formation, and this squad peeled off to clear the building, this squad would then offer mutual infantry support with the armor, as they would then move in this block to clear it on the other side of this fence, on the north side of this fence. As that was going on, these squads in the south, having cleared this building, would come out, have fields of fire to cover this squad's breach of this building, which they would breach on the first floor and clear the building, and then take up positions along the windows facing the main compound of the militia headquarters, while this other squad behind them, after they had held the position to allow them to advance, would come in behind them outside the building, throw a grappling hook up, and effectively scale onto the roof of the building and lay down in the prone position and lay down heavy fire into this facility, which was already taking strikes by now from loitering munitions, slamming into the technicals that were parked in this facility, as well as the personnel caught out in the open. As the light tanks were also firing north into this facility, there was now a tactical L vector of fire at everything that moved in this headquarters facility, including the garage facility, which was taking a heavy shelling from the light tanks. As homes were also being shelled in this particular operation, they were being destroyed and flattened quickly by the 105 millimeter rifled tank guns of the PAP Type 62G light tanks. In this animation or illustration, two shells from light tank fire are slamming into this large suburban home, completely razing it to the ground. This vehicle here, this Technical, had also been destroyed by fire from light tank fire. And this building over here reduced to rubble. These were common sights throughout this neighborhood in the south of the city of Odessa. Destruction was simply everywhere as the loitering munitions came in hot to strike targets, supporting the ground troops as they used every terrain feature to their advantage, whether it was a wadi or a washout, whether it was a mound or even rock formations scattered throughout the area. Everything was utilized to the greatest tactical advantage of the People's Armed Police, although the militiamen of the American side were doing very similar or the same. They simply could not withstand the combined arms firepower of the loitering munitions and the ground troops with their vehicle support and their heavy weapons, as well as their tactical superiority, as they had every advantage in terms of AI and ISR capabilities and communications, enabling them to see everything in real time as it unfolded on the battlefield, as they monitored at the squad level and above their handheld tablet-based combat data links with the maps that depicted friendly and enemy positions at all times, and even removed them as they were destroyed or eliminated in real time, as the ISR apparatus had an iron grip over this battle space. Everything was seen as it showed up on the battlefield, coming out of buildings or homes, or as it entered them to inform the PAP ground forces of where enemy forces were at all times, as well as their own friendly units. There were also, of course, combat data links in each and every vehicle as well. As these two squads got into position and began to add to the firepower being vectored into the main headquarters facility, these two squads now bounded across Bull Run Drive to clear this small trailer building while this squad moved up, and its flamethrower operator added to the carnage along with the flamethrower operators of these two squads, the one on the building on the first level and the other on the roof, incinerating everything in this motor pool area. As these troops ran, they were slammed by two loitering munitions as the light tanks destroyed these technicals and personnel parked on this side of the motor pool, as well as shelling this building and these personnel here, with loitering munition strikes adding to the carnage in real time. With this squad in this position, this squad was able to bound in to clear this building, with this squad following, going inside the building instead of outside of it, just for additional protection, as there were still some survivors firing at them as they entered this building here, while these light tanks of the staggered column vehicle formation were moving down Betty Lou Drive. This squad would bound ahead, and then this squad would effectively bound to breach and clear this building, as this squad and the light tanks outside the building had fields of fire to cover the bound of this squad. As they would stop here, they would begin to shell the facility with their guns, their 105mm guns on their light tanks, as these squads moved into this block. As that happened, these light tanks began to move up into this area. With these vehicles and personnel already destroyed, there were 20 in this building trying to lay down fire at these light tanks out of the windows, and also would lay down fire at these two squads as they bounded after clearing this building to this fence line, and would scale this fence, as it was a chain link fence in this particular area. And one squad would bound to clear the building with the 20 personnel inside to support the light tanks that were outside on Betty Lou Drive, having had taken some fire from a few Law anti-armor weapons, which didn't do anywhere near the damage that an AT-4 or even a PSLR-1 could do, but were still somewhat of a threat this building had to be cleared, and as it had taken some tank shell fire, this squad would breach it as this squad laid down supporting fire and then would move into this area and fire at personnel on the upper floors of this building. As the squad would begin to breach and clear it out, this squad would hold their position temporarily here while these light tanks moved up here, and this squad moved here along the light tanks and then breached this building to clear it. As the vehicles now on JP Teal were moving up alongside of the buildings as well to aid in the clearance of these buildings from sitting a bit further back, but acting as mobile fire support platforms, much like the light tanks were doing for the squads as they advanced ahead of them to clear out these buildings. This was all done with a high degree of tactical professionalism, which enabled the PAP to ensure the survivability of their vehicles to the utmost maximum level. However, the American militiamen still fought avidly against this devastating combined assault being levied against them. As the squads moved ahead and cleared buildings ahead of their vehicles, they would use these as temporary firing positions to levy heavy fire against the militiamen as they tried to utilize their anti-armor and even some anti-tank weapons against the PAP vehicles as they moved further down the street but laid down heavy fire from a distance. And as loitering munitions came in, they would strike targets on rooftops and other places to prevent the Americans from utilizing high ground as a means by which to surveil the battlefield and levy devastating attacks, whether they were sniper attacks or anti-armor/anti-tank attacks, even Molotov attacks at closer ranges. As the Type 73 flamethrower was not only a devastating weapon of war, but had a high degree of psychological impact. These were devastating against buildings, but also against personnel themselves, as they roasted them alive and sent many fleeing for their lives, as the buildings they took cover in were gradually incinerated around them by these devastating weapons. As these weapons were also levied against their headquarters area by two different squads on the lower and roof level of this building, the combined attack of flamethrower firepower with the use of HJ-08 ATGMs, even Chinese Type 69 rocket-propelled grenade fire, in addition to 35mm tube-fired grenades, was simply devastating beyond all imagination, along with all of the small arms fire levied against them as well. As personnel were shredded in the outdoor areas of this motor pool of the headquarters area, these personnel fought tenaciously but were simply annihilated as they did not have the wherewithal to stand against this powerful assault. Although they did have some heavy machine guns available, most of which mounted in their technicals, as well as also general purpose and even light machine guns, they simply were no match for the strength of the People's Armed Police vehicles. However, that's not to say that there wouldn't be any PAP casualties. There would be, but nowhere near as many as the militia and Medkif would inflict upon the People's Armed Police in that particular battle. In this particular battle, this militia had been completely caught off guard and would suffer tremendously as a result, as many had emerged from the local buildings, whether homes or businesses, with weapons in hand. They simply had no time to muster a coherent defense. As these squads were clearing this building, the squad cleared this building and prepared to bound and clear this building, which was now occupied by militiamen trying to lay down fire against them as they prepared to clear it. This squad would move and clear this building, while this squad would move alongside of it through this area here as it was being cleared. In the north, as the vehicles continued down JP Teal, these squads cleared this house. The squad laid down supporting fire, the squad breached and would clear the home, and this squad would exit through the front door, and the squad moved up alongside of it as this squad cleared the house and exited. A grouping of 15 personnel had moved in to occupy this particular building from this parking area as loitering munition strikes had come in and hit this technical and these personnel here and the personnel on the roof of this building. Early on, this ATV had fled into this area and tried to take refuge in the gas station parking lot, but it too would be destroyed by a loitering munition strike. This rocket-propelled grenade team on the back of this ATV will have already been destroyed by fire being vectored at them from the northernmost platoon of vehicles, consisting of their Type 86G infantry fighting vehicle and their 4 heavy machine gun equipped Type 63 armor personnel carriers. As this house had been cleared and this squad had moved up alongside of it, as this squad now exited the building, vehicles would now move up and would begin to take fire from the inside of this dollar store, as the roof had been struck by several loitering munitions to eliminate the RPG men on the top, as well as also the sniper/sharpshooters. Personnel taking cover behind the concrete abutment of this parking area in the dollar store had fired across the deserty field at the northernmost platoon, but were simply cut down by a hail of 12.7mm machine gun fire and 30mm autocannon fire from the vehicles of the northernmost platoon as they advanced just off the map and to the north across the deserty field of this area. As these two squads, again, now prepared to assault this building, as there were 8 personnel inside firing out of holes in the wall, having had been created by 30mm autocannon fire at the building. They now fired a few laws out of this particular building from the holes in the wall, as well as also an M60 machine gun, as a machine gunner operating this weapon was laying down a hail of bullets as these troops now bounded and covered tactically across this open area towards this particular dollar store, using the terrain to their best advantage, although rounds from the M60 firing the 7.62 by 51 NATO round splashed all around them, and even a few personnel would take hits in their vests, as these vests would save their lives. They would effectively shatter, however, by the raw strength of these general-purpose machine gun rounds, and would not just knock the wind out of these personnel, but shatter their ribs. However, they would fight tenaciously and continue their advance towards the building, utilizing not just their small arms, but 35mm tube-fired grenades. They would fire HJ-08 ATGMs and rocket-propelled grenades from their Type 69s at the holed-up American militiamen that were within the building. As their bounding and covering continued ahead of their vehicles continued to lay down fire into the building to allow for these forces to bound and cover towards it, effectively acting as heavy fire support against the building for their squads. And these vehicles would continue to move up by the time their squads reached this position, with this squad moving towards the back of the building to watch the exits while this squad breached and would clear out the dollar store with great vigor and fanaticism, wiping out the survivors inside. As that was happening, this building was in the process of being cleared in a similar way, as this squad laid down fire for this squad to breach, and then the squad moved alongside the building according to building clearance procedures, and the squad would wipe out the 15 personnel who had made it inside and tried to put up resistance against not only these squads as they tried to breach, but also against the vehicles out of windows. And now this building was clear, these two squads would prepare to move toward the gas station, bounding and covering tactically to clear the gas station, which would be their final position on the map. As these squads, these two, would clear out this building, vehicles would now move into position in the parking area and along the street on Adobe here, which would be their final position, allowing for the northernmost platoon to move back south onto the map and cross under the highway of State Highway 385 and get into a herringbone formation with their vehicles and dismount all 5 squads to watch 360 degrees around their platoon. As that was happening, and these buildings were being cleared in this area, and the light tanks were moving forward, now in a column formation, this squad and this squad bounded and covered tactically to clear the Cowboy Church, while the squad moved alongside of it as the squad breached and cleared the building. These light tanks moved through this area, and this squad would move from this building to clear the hotel, coming out on the hotel roof, and would lay down fire from the roof at these personnel who were still surviving in the parking area of the self-storage area, as some had already been hit and destroyed by tank shell fire as well as loitering munition strikes against the technicals and personnel caught in the open. While there were a few survivors that were trying to lay down return fire, they were simply cut down by the fire from the building, and then ultimately some light tank fire from the heavy machine gunners and coaxial machine guns on the light tanks. While 5 personnel made it into this building on the self-storage site, they would be cleared by the squad breaching to clear these buildings, while the other squad that had been up against this Cowboy Church now moved to enter the gate through this side and clear the office building on site, while the light tanks then, in a straight line, moved under the bridge, but then broke into 5 individual tanks to watch fields of fire that covered this entire area. While this area was covered by fields of fire in a 360-degree circle, these tanks watched this area and could offer mutual support between these 2 platoons. Now that this entire area had been cleared, the vehicles had reached their final positions on the other side of the highway and at the highway on its eastern side. These 2 squads moved to clear these buildings in this area, with this squad breaching this building and clearing out the 5 personnel holed up inside, while the other squad breached the office and would clear it. As there was nobody in the office, these stack teams would rapidly move through the area, and as it was cleared, they would exit and move to clear the other church. As they would effectively hop the fencing out of the office and move to clear the main church building, this squad, after clearing this side of the self-storage place, would bound and clear the annex building of the church after crossing the entry road into the church grounds and crossing the parking area to clear this building. And both squads would end up clearing the survivors who were even left alive out of the headquarters facility, and they would have massive support from the 2 squads continuing to hold their positions on this particular building on the roof and on the first floor, as well as the light tank platoon that was in the south cutting off the southern escape routes on Harrisburg Drive, continuing to lay down shell fire as well as heavy machine gun fire and coax fire into the headquarters grounds. As the squads in the area now prepared to move in and clear out the headquarters buildings, the armored infantry troops would still have a fight on their hands, as the militiamen simply did not want to give up their positions in their headquarters and would put up one hell of a fight against the 2 squads tasked with eradicating the remaining survivors and capturing the militia leadership, if at all possible. And as was the case, the militia leadership, the commander, was actually still alive at this point and holed up inside of the headquarters building on their headquarters installation, which again, the headquarters was simply a long-haul trucking maintenance facility repurposed as a militia headquarters in this neighborhood, in which all of the militia members effectively resided. As the 2 squads prepared for their final operation in this sector to clear the last remaining militia stronghold, the armored infantry troops laid down, suppressing fire from both church buildings as they prepared to assault the premises. As they had fire support from the light tanks on Harrisburg Drive, as well as the 2 additional armored infantry squads in the adjacent building to the immediate east of the facility. The 2 squads now moved in through the main gate of the facility, with 1 squad peeling off to clear the few remaining survivors out of the original 100 holed up in the garage facility, while the other squad cleared the headquarters building itself. Heavy fighting would ensue in both buildings, even though they had been thoroughly shelled by heavy light tank fire from the 105mm shells vectored into the headquarters building. The militiamen, again, would fight tenaciously with everything available to them, including general-purpose machine guns, as all of their heavy machine guns had been effectively knocked out on their technicals, but they had light machine guns such as the M249 SAW, and they had general-purpose machine guns such as 240 Bravos and M60s. As the PAP wanted to complete this operation rapidly, as they had a very high tempo of operations occurring, and this battle would last 2.5 hours, essentially ending at 3 a.m., the fighting inside of the headquarters building itself and the garage would be heavy, nonetheless. It would even require the other squad, having cleared the headquarters building, to act as reinforcements to help clear the main garage facility, as the fighting inside was intense. As the headquarters building had been cleared, the militia leader had already been taken, and a PAP soldier had been tasked to watch him inside the recently cleared headquarters building itself, while the rest of the squad acted as reinforcements temporarily to help clear the main garage facility of its remaining survivors, as the garage was littered with ample equipment and even technicals that were parked inside. There were many hiding places for the militiamen to take cover behind and return fire against the People's Armed Police shock troops as they had breached the building. However, PAP, utilizing their quadcopter assets within the confines of the garage, found all of the hiding personnel and vectored their fire accordingly, and simply wiped these personnel out in a matter of 15 minutes before they then allowed the additional squad to return to the headquarters building temporarily to get the leader and bring him into the garage before both squads would partake in the assault against the last building on the campus, which was the logistical/supply building. Originally having had 20 members inside, these members had been whittled down to 15 as they had taken some light tank fire into the building earlier, which had eliminated 5 of the personnel. Now the last 15 members were taking suppressing fire from this squad as they exited the building, allowing for this squad to breach the building to clear out the remaining personnel, while the squad that had laid down suppressing fire moved alongside of the building. Again, they had left one member of their squad with the prisoner who was bound with zip ties inside of this building. Therefore, he couldn't resist or escape. And now, this squad, having a breach, would clear out the last remaining survivors of the original 20, again whittled down to 15 members. As this battle had come to an end, many other battles were still raging throughout the battle space, and the fight would continue for a number of hours yet still, as the invasion would see many battles occurring all throughout the nation, some ending before others. And as the campaign in the Midland-Odessa battle space would be relatively short compared to other campaigns, the fighting would still be extremely heavy and would last most of the first day. As the flanks were cleared for the main operation that was unfolding concurrently just 5 miles to the southwest, the battle that began at 12:45 a.m., or just 15 minutes after many other battles had begun at 12:30 a.m., would see a light tank battalion, also from the PAP 2nd Light Armored Division's 1st Brigade, carrying out an assault against the highly coveted oil reclamation plant, which was needed for the post-invasion colonization operations to remove impurities from oil, especially oil extracted in this particular area. As the plant and its surrounding industrial zone had been rapidly occupied by over 600 armed reactionary civilians. These were non-militia civilians, which had no centralized leadership, no logistical system whatsoever at all to speak of in order to have sustained operations and resistance, simply left their homes with weapons in hand, as this was West Odessa, and many of these armed reactionary civilians either worked in this industrial area, including in the oil reclamation plant itself, or had worked there previously and had seen this area as a place of refuge, as there were many stronger, sturdier buildings in this area from where they could put up some kind of resistance. Many of them fled their homes as soon as a very brief artillery shelling hit their neighborhood, as they exited their homes with weapons in hand, and as they had seen some other civilians wiped out by these artillery strikes, had rapidly fled to the industrial zone along I-20, just to the south of their portion of Odessa, which was called West Odessa, as it effectively was a herd mentality sort of movement, as they copied one another and simply followed each other into this area. Originally, the Light Mechanized Infantry Battalion that was tasked with attacking and destroying the Alpha Company on the local municipal airport, as well as also anything that survived the heavy strikes of the 101st Brigade Support Battalion on the National Guard Armory, was originally to be tasked with clearing out these suddenly appearing groupings or clusters of armed reactionary civilians, but then was rediverted to their original mission immediately as these personnel had fled south. And now the armored battalion tasked with taking this objective originally would also now have to clear it, and do so in the most surgical manner possible. Although they would receive artillery and other support, it would have to be conducted in a highly surgical manner in order to limit the damage done to any of these crucial industrial facilities, especially the oil reclamation plant itself. And as the assault would begin at 12:45, or 15 minutes after many other battles had begun, this will be covered in the next installation of this hypothetical invasion documentary series, highlighting fourth-generation warfare doctrines through the lens of a Sino-Russian coalition invasion. More to come in the next video.